The morning sun poured its soft golden light through the tall glass windows of St. Mary's Church, filling the hall with warmth and joy. The guests whispered in excitement as they watched the beautiful decorations shimmer under the light. White roses hung from every corner, their petals fresh with dew, and soft music played in the background, creating an atmosphere of love and peace. Mr. Daniel, dressed in a neat black suit, stood near the altar with a calm smile on his face. His eyes carried both nervousness and hope. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. He looked at the woman walking slowly down the aisle, Clara. She was wearing a white gown that sparkled like snow, and her gentle smile made everyone believe this was a perfect love story. Clara appeared kind, graceful, and full of charm. The guests whispered about how lucky Daniel was to have found love again after so many lonely years. Daniel's heart was full of gratitude. After losing his wife to illness years ago, he had almost given up on love. But Clara had entered his life like a miracle, bringing light back into his dark world. She cared for him, supported him, and made him laugh again. For Daniel, this wedding wasn't just about love. It was about starting over, believing that happiness could return even after pain. As the priest cleared his throat and opened his book, the music softened. The air felt still, peaceful, almost sacred. Daniel took a deep breath and turned to face Clara fully. She smiled sweetly, her eyes soft and calm. Everything seemed perfect, but just as the priest began to speak the sacred vows, a loud echoing sound broke the silence. The heavy wooden doors of the church swung open with a bang, making everyone jump in surprise. The music stopped instantly. All heads turned toward the entrance. There, standing in the doorway, was a young boy, small, pale, and trembling slightly. He was breathing heavily, as if he had been running for a long time. His face was red, and his eyes were wet with tears mixed with anger. His clothes were messy, his hair sticking to his forehead, and in his hand he held something tightly, a small object no one could clearly see. It was Ethan, Mr. Daniel's 12-year-old son. The boy's voice cracked with emotion as he stared straight at his father standing by the altar. For a moment no one spoke. The hall was silent, except for the soft echo of Ethan's heavy breathing. Daniel blinked in shock. He had told Ethan to stay at his aunt's house until after the wedding. Why was he here, and why did he look so upset? The guests began whispering among themselves, their curious eyes shifting between the father, the bride, and the boy. Clara froze where she stood, her face suddenly pale, though she quickly tried to force a gentle smile, pretending not to be shaken. But inside, her heart was racing. Daniel stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. "Ethan, what's wrong, son?" he asked. But before Daniel could say more, Ethan's voice filled the hall, trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Dad," he shouted, "please don't marry her. You don't know who she really is." The words sliced through the silence like a knife. Gasps rose from the crowd. An old woman dropped her flower bouquet in shock. The priest froze, unsure whether to continue or stop. Clara's smile vanished completely. Her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes flashing with panic for a brief second before she looked away. Daniel's heart began to pound. His face turned pale. He stared at his son, trying to understand what he just heard. Ethan's eyes were full of pain, confusion, and fear. He wasn't joking, and he wasn't just a jealous child. There was something deep and real behind his words. Daniel slowly walked down from the altar, each step echoing loudly in the silent church. "Ethan, what are you saying?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Why would you say that?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved from his father to Clara, then back again. He took a deep breath and spoke softly, but the emotion in his tone made everyone listen closely. "She's not who you think she is, Dad," he said. "She's hiding something bad." Murmurs filled the air again. Guests began turning to one another, whispering in disbelief. The priest closed his book quietly. Clara finally spoke, her voice trembling but still trying to sound calm. "Daniel, please, he's just confused," she said sweetly. "He's scared to see you with someone new. He misses his mother." Her eyes glistened as if she were about to cry, and some people nodded sympathetically. But Ethan shook his head violently. "That's not true." "She's lying," he yelled. His voice cracked with desperation. He stepped closer, holding up the small object in his hand, a tiny voice recorder. Daniel's eyes widened. "Ethan, what's that?" he asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked straight at Clara, and for a second she looked terrified. Then he turned back to his father. "Please, Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "Just listen to this before you say I do, Izzy, please." Clara's hands trembled. The guests fell completely silent again, every eye focused on the boy. Even the birds outside seemed to stop singing. Daniel didn't move, caught between confusion and fear. He looked at Clara, then at his son, and finally nodded slowly. "All right," he said softly. "Play it." Ethan's thumb hovered over the button on the recorder. Clara took a step forward quickly. "No!" she cried, her voice sharp and desperate. "He doesn't know what he's doing." But Ethan pressed the button anyway. And at that exact moment, before the first sound could even play, the scene cut to black, leaving everyone in the church frozen in shock and fear. The church stood in complete silence as everyone stared at the small recorder in Ethan's shaking hand. For a second it felt like time had stopped. The air was thick, filled with tension and fear. Daniel's eyes moved slowly from his son to the woman he was about to marry. Clara's hands were pressed together tightly, her knuckles white, her eyes darting from Ethan to the guests and then back to Daniel. She looked like a trapped bird ready to fly away. The priest coughed quietly but did not speak. Every person in the hall waited for the sound that was about to come from that tiny device. Ethan's thumb pressed the button, and the soft click echoed like thunder in the still air. Then came a voice, calm, smooth, and familiar. It was Clara's voice. "Once I marry Daniel," the voice said, "everything will be easier. I'll have access to the company accounts, and then we can finally disappear." A few gasps rippled through the guests. Someone dropped a glass, and the sharp sound made Clara flinch. Daniel froze, his face turning pale. He looked at Clara in disbelief, hoping somehow that the voice wasn't real, that maybe the recording was fake. But Ethan stood firm, tears rolling down his cheeks. The recording continued, and the same voice spoke again, laughing softly. "He believes every word I say, poor man. By the time he finds out, we'll be far away." Clara lunged forward suddenly and snatched the recorder from Ethan's hand. "Stop it!" she cried, pressing the button to silence it. "This is not what it sounds like. Someone is trying to ruin us." Daniel stared at her quietly. "Ruin us?" he repeated. "Clara, what is this? Why would my son make this up?" Clara's lips trembled. "I don't know," she whispered. "He must be confused or angry. Maybe he doesn't want me to be part of the family." She turned to the guests, her eyes pleading for sympathy. "You all know how children can be after losing a mother. He's hurting. He needs time." For a brief moment, a few guests nodded slowly, unsure what to believe. Ethan shook his head. "I'm not lying," he shouted. "I heard her talking on the phone 2 nights ago. She was with another man. She said she was only marrying Dad for his money." His voice broke with pain and tears streamed down his face. Daniel stepped toward him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, are you sure?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded hard. "I'm sure, Dad. I followed her last week when she said she was going to meet her friend. She met a man instead, and they talked about you. I didn't want to believe it, but then I recorded her phone call." The guests started whispering again. The bride's family looked embarrassed, avoiding eye contact. Clara's face turned red, then pale again. "That's not true," she said quickly. "That's ridiculous. Daniel, please listen to me. I love you. You know me." She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. His heart pounded in his chest, torn between love and fear. He wanted to believe her, yet the look in his son's eyes told him something else, truth. The priest cleared his throat softly, unsure whether to stop the ceremony or continue. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. "Clara," he said slowly, "who is the man my son saw you with?" Clara's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her eyes flickered nervously, her lips trembling. "He's just a friend," she whispered. "A friend from work." "Then why did you lie about where you were going?" Daniel asked. "Why did you tell me you were meeting your cousin?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Because you were so busy and I didn't want to worry you. I just wanted the day to be perfect." Ethan stepped forward again, holding a small photo. "Then what about this?" he asked. The picture showed Clara and a tall man sitting together at a restaurant, their hands almost touching. Clara gasped. She hadn't realized Ethan had the photo. "Where did you get that?" she asked quickly. "Mom's old phone," Ethan said quietly. "It was saved there." I think she already knew something before she passed away. Daniel's heart sank even deeper. He felt dizzy, his mind spinning. The guests fell into total silence again, every pair of eyes fixed on Clara. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, as if her strength had drained away, she sat down on one of the front pews, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "I just needed a chance to start again. I didn't know Ethan would find out." Daniel looked at her, his voice soft but full of disappointment. "You plan to marry me for money?" he asked. "Was any of it real?" Clara looked up slowly, her mascara running down her cheeks. "At first, no," she said quietly. "But then I started to care. I didn't want to hurt you. I just thought if I could go through with it, maybe I could forget everything else." The crowd murmured, some angry, some sympathetic. Ethan stood beside his father, still trembling but relieved that the truth was finally coming out. Daniel turned to the guests, his voice calm but firm. "I think the wedding is over," he said. The priest nodded silently and closed his book. Clara stood up shakily, looking around at the faces now filled with judgment and pity. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I really am." She picked up her bouquet from the floor, holding it tightly as if it could give her strength, and walked slowly toward the door she had entered through not long ago. Ethan watched her leave, unsure whether to feel anger or sadness. Daniel put a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "You saved me." Tears filled Daniel's eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. The guests began leaving quietly, whispering about what had happened. The music never played again that day. The white roses looked less bright now, their petals falling to the floor one by one. Father and son stood together at the altar, two broken hearts, but also two survivors of a truth that could no longer be hidden. And though the wedding had ended, something new had begun, a bond of trust that nothing could break. The church was empty now except for Daniel and his son Ethan. The last few guests had left quietly, their footsteps fading into the distance. The candles still burned on the altar, their light flickering against the walls like soft tears. The air felt heavy, filled with the smell of flowers that now seemed too sweet, almost painful. Daniel sat on one of the front pews, his hands clasped tightly together, staring at the floor. His mind replayed everything that had just happened, the recording, the lies, Clara's confession. It felt unreal, like a bad dream that refused to end. Ethan stood a few steps away, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. He had wanted to protect his father, but now seeing the sadness in Daniel's eyes made him feel guilty. He walked slowly toward him and sat down beside him. For a while neither spoke. Only the faint sound of the wind outside broke the silence. Then Daniel sighed deeply and looked at his son. "How long did you know, Ethan?" he asked quietly. Ethan hesitated. "A few weeks," he said softly. "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure. I thought maybe I was wrong at first, but then I heard her talking on the phone and I knew." Daniel nodded slowly. His eyes were tired and his voice low. "You should have told me sooner," he said gently. "I would have listened." Ethan's lips trembled. "I was scared you wouldn't believe me," he admitted. "You were so happy, Dad. I didn't want to ruin it unless I was sure." Daniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder, squeezing it lightly. "You did the right thing," he said. "You saved me from a big mistake." Ethan looked up at his father, his eyes still wet. "I didn't want to see you get hurt again like when Mom died," he whispered. "I just wanted you to be happy." Daniel smiled sadly. "I know, son, and I'm proud of you." For the first time that day, a small bit of warmth returned between them. Daniel stood up and walked toward the altar, picking up one of the fallen white roses. The petals had started to curl, and a few were stained with tears that had fallen earlier. "It's strange," he said quietly. "A wedding is supposed to be about love and truth, but today it became about lies." Ethan joined him, staring at the rose in his father's hand. "Maybe it's better this way," he said. "At least you found out before it was too late." Daniel nodded. "You're right." He looked around the church one last time, then blew out the candles one by one. The two of them walked out together into the cool evening air. The sun had already started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Outside, the world looked peaceful again, but inside both hearts were still hurting. As they reached the car, Daniel paused. "Ethan," he said, "I want you to promise me something." Ethan looked up curiously. "What is it, Dad?" Daniel smiled faintly. Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll always tell me the truth. Even if it's hard. Even if you think I won't like it. Ethan nodded quickly. I promise. Daniel opened the car door and said softly, Good, because truth is the only thing that keeps love alive. They drove home quietly, neither speaking much. The road was long and dark, lit only by the headlights and the faint moonlight above. When they reached home, Daniel parked the car and sat there for a moment without turning off the engine. He looked at the house that used to feel so warm and welcoming, but now felt cold. I thought Clara would make this house feel alive again, he said softly. But maybe some things take time? Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt and looked at his father with concern. We can make it alive again, just you and me, he said. Mom would want that. Daniel turned to him and smiled weakly. You're right. Your mom always believed in us. They went inside and Daniel noticed something strange on the living room table, a small white envelope with his name written on it in Clara's handwriting. His heart sank again. He opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter. Daniel, it read, I am sorry for everything. I know you'll never forgive me, but I never wanted to hurt your son. I made mistakes and I will pay for them. Please take care of yourself and Ethan. You both deserve better. Daniel read it twice, then folded it slowly and placed it back on the table. She's gone, he said quietly. For good this time. Ethan walked over and hugged him tightly. Let her go, Dad, he said softly. She doesn't deserve your pain. Daniel hugged him back, closing his eyes. You're right, son, he whispered. She doesn't. That night the house was quiet. Daniel sat by the window, looking at the stars. He thought about how quickly happiness could turn into heartbreak, how trust could be broken in just one moment. But then he looked at his son asleep on the couch, and he realized something important. Love wasn't about big promises or fancy weddings. It was about honesty, courage, and family. He whispered softly to himself, Thank you, Ethan. You showed me what love really means. The wind outside blew gently through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a strange sense of peace. The pain was still there, but it didn't feel hopeless anymore. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day to rebuild, to start again, not with a lie, but with truth. And as the moonlight shone through the window, Daniel knew that even though his wedding had ended, his story with his son had just begun. The next morning came quietly, with soft sunlight shining through the curtains. Daniel woke early, his mind still heavy with everything that had happened. He had barely slept, replaying every word, every look, and every sound from the day before. The voice recording, Clara's tears, Ethan's trembling voice, all of it echoed in his head like a storm that refused to end. He walked to the kitchen and made himself a cup of coffee, staring at the empty chair across the table where Clara used to sit. It felt strange and lonely, but peaceful too. Ethan soon came in, rubbing his eyes and yawning. Morning, Dad, he said softly. Daniel smiled faintly. Morning, son. Did you sleep well? Ethan nodded, though he looked tired too. Yeah, kind of. Daniel gestured for him to sit. We have to talk about what happened, he said gently. Ethan looked nervous, but nodded again. Daniel took a deep breath. You told me you followed Clara and saw her with another man, he said. Do you know who he was? Ethan hesitated. Not really, he admitted. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he had a scar near his left eye. He looked older than her. And when I checked Mom's old phone, I found his photo too. I think his name was Alex. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. That name was familiar. Years ago, when Daniel still worked full-time at his company, there was a man named Alex Moore who had been caught stealing confidential documents and selling them to competitors. Daniel had fired him and handed his case over to the police, but Alex had disappeared before the trial. He was never found. Daniel's heart started to race. Ethan, he said slowly, are you sure the man was named Alex? Ethan frowned. I'm not sure, but Mom's phone had a message saved from Clara to someone called Alex. It said, I'll get him to sign the papers, and then we can finish this. Daniel stood up suddenly, his face pale. Papers? He repeated. He rushed to his office room and opened his desk drawer, searching through files. After a few moments, he froze. One of his company's contract folders was missing. It was the folder that contained legal papers for his company's new partnership project, A deal worth millions. Daniel's chest tightened. "No," he whispered. "This can't be." Ethan followed him in. "What's wrong, Dad?" he asked. Daniel turned to him slowly. "She wasn't just planning to marry me for money," he said quietly. "She wanted my company too. That's why she was with Alex. They were working together." Ethan's eyes widened. "But she's gone, right? She left the letter and everything." Daniel shook his head. If she was working with Alex, then she might not have left at all. That letter could have been part of their plan. He grabbed his phone and called his assistant at work. "Tom," he said quickly, "check the office security logs. See if anyone used my access card after the wedding." Tom sounded surprised but obeyed. After a few tense minutes, he called back. "Sir, someone used your card around midnight. They entered the records room and stayed for about 20 minutes. Daniel's stomach dropped. "Was it Clara?" he asked. "We couldn't see her face clearly on the camera," Tom said, "but she had long hair and wore a white coat." That was enough proof. Daniel hung up and looked at Ethan. "We're going to the office," he said firmly. Ethan nodded, his face serious. They drove quickly through the city, the tension growing heavier with every passing minute. When they arrived, Daniel unlocked the building and went straight to his office. Papers were scattered everywhere, and the cabinet door was slightly open. He searched through the folders and found what he feared most. The contract papers were gone. "She took them," he said, his voice low but full of anger. "She's going to sell them to someone else." Ethan looked worried. "What should we do?" Daniel thought for a moment. "We find her before she can do it." Just as he was about to call the police, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number, but he recognized the voice message that came through. It was Clara's voice again. "Daniel," she said softly, "please don't call the police. I didn't mean to take the files, but Alex forced me. He said he'd hurt Ethan if I didn't help him. I'm sorry. Meet me at the old train station tonight, and I'll give you everything back." Daniel's hands trembled. Ethan looked at him anxiously. "Dad, you're not really going to go, are you?" "What if it's a trap?" Daniel hesitated. He didn't trust Clara anymore, but if Alex was involved, Ethan could still be in danger. "I'll go," he said finally. "But you're staying here." Ethan shook his head. "No way. I'm coming with you." Daniel sighed but knew there was no point arguing. "Fine," he said. "But you stay close to me." That evening, the sky turned dark and the rain began to fall. The old train station was quiet, almost abandoned. Broken lights flickered above the tracks, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the empty space. Daniel and Ethan stood near the platform, waiting. Then they heard footsteps. Clara appeared from the shadows, her face pale, her hands clutching a small folder. "Daniel," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do. Where's Alex?" Daniel asked coldly. She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, a loud crash came from behind the old station doors. A tall man stepped out, a scar on his left eye, his face twisted in anger. "You shouldn't have come," Alex said, holding a gun in his hand. Ethan grabbed his father's arm tightly, fear filling his eyes. Clara screamed, "Alex, stop! Don't hurt them!" But Alex only laughed. "You both ruined everything," he said. "Now you'll pay." Daniel stepped in front of his son, his heart pounding. "If you want me, take me," he said. "Leave the boy." But just as Alex raised the gun, a siren blared in the distance. Police lights flashed through the broken windows. Alex turned in shock, but it was too late. The police stormed in, shouting for him to drop the weapon. Clara fell to her knees, sobbing. The officers handcuffed Alex and led him away. Daniel stood there, holding Ethan close. The folder lay on the ground beside them, safe at last. Clara looked up at Daniel with tearful eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted this to happen." Daniel stared at her silently, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said softly, "It's over, Clara." As the police car drove away into the night, Daniel turned to Ethan and hugged him tightly. The truth was darker than he imagined, but at least now it was all out in the open. The rain washed the dirt from the tracks, and though the night was cold, Daniel felt lighter inside. The hidden truth had finally come to light. The rain fell harder as the flashing police lights faded into the distance, leaving Daniel, Ethan, and Clara standing in the old train station surrounded by silence and puddles. The sound of dripping water mixed with Clara's quiet sobs. Daniel stood still, his jacket soaked, his mind torn between anger and pity. Ethan clung to his father's arm, staring at the woman who had almost destroyed their lives. The police had taken Alex away, but his shadow still hung in the air like a ghost. Clara finally looked up, her face pale under the dim light. "Daniel," she whispered, "please listen to me just once. I have to tell you everything." Daniel's expression was cold. "You've already said enough," he replied. "You lied to me, used me, and put my son in danger." Clara shook her head desperately. "I didn't want to. I never meant to hurt you. Alex forced me." Her voice cracked as tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks. She stepped forward slowly, her white coat clinging to her arms. "Please, just listen. Maybe you'll understand." Daniel hesitated, then nodded once. "Talk," he said quietly. Clara took a deep breath. "I met Alex 2 years ago," she began. "I didn't know who he really was at first. He was kind to me, helped me when I had nothing. My husband had left me, and I was drowning in debt. Alex promised to help me start over. But soon I learned the truth. He was planning something illegal, something dangerous. He told me about you, about your company, about how much money you had. He said if I could get close to you, we could both have a new life." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So you agreed?" Clara lowered her head. "At first, yes. I was weak and I thought money could fix everything. I didn't care who got hurt. But when I met you, Daniel, something changed. You were different. You were kind and patient. Oh, you treated me with respect. No one had ever done that before. For the first time in years, I felt like a real person again." Her voice trembled as she spoke, and even Ethan could see the pain in her eyes. "Then why didn't you stop?" Daniel asked sharply. "Why keep lying?" Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Because Alex wouldn't let me. He followed me, threatened me. And I tried to break things off. He said he'd hurt Ethan if I didn't finish what we started. I swear, Daniel, I didn't know he would actually come after you." Ethan frowned. "You're lying," he said quietly. "You said you loved Dad, but you still helped that man." Clara looked at him sadly. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I thought I could protect both of you by keeping quiet, but it only made things worse." Daniel turned away, staring at the train tracks. "You could have told me," he said softly. "You could have come to me before all of this." "I wanted to," she whispered, "but I was afraid you'd hate me. And I was right." Her voice broke and she sank to her knees. "I've lost everything now, Alex, the money, and you. But I don't care anymore. I just want you to be safe." Daniel watched her cry for a long moment. The sound of the rain filled the empty station, echoing against the walls. Finally he spoke. "Clara, you need to go to the police and tell them everything. Help them put Alex away for good." Clara nodded weakly. "I will. I already told them part of it, but there's more they don't know. I'll tell them everything now." She looked up at Daniel again, her eyes full of sorrow. "Will you ever forgive me?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He thought about all the moments they had shared, the laughter, the dinners, the dreams they had talked about. He thought about how real it had felt, how much he had wanted to believe in her. "Forgiveness isn't something I can give right now," he said finally. "But maybe one day if you truly change." Clara nodded slowly, accepting his words. She stood up shakily. "Thank you for listening," she whispered. "And thank you, Ethan, for being brave. You saved your father's life." Ethan said nothing, just looked at her with a mix of sadness and relief. Clara turned and began to walk away down the empty platform. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly until they disappeared into the night. Daniel watched her go, feeling both lighter and emptier than before. The truth was painful, but at least it was finally over. The storm began to fade, and a faint streak of dawnlight appeared on the horizon. Ethan looked up at his father. "Do you think she really meant it, Dad? That she's sorry?" Daniel sighed. "Maybe," he said. "People do terrible things when they're scared or desperate. But regret doesn't erase the pain they cause." He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "The best thing we can do is move forward." They walked back to the car together, their clothes still damp but their hearts a little calmer. As they drove home, the city lights flickered in the distance, signaling a new day. At home, Daniel made breakfast while Ethan sat at the table, quiet but thoughtful. "Dad," Ethan said after a while, "I don't understand why people lie for love or money. It just makes everything worse." Daniel nodded slowly. "Because some people don't know the difference between wanting something and deserving it. But you'll learn, son. The truth always wins in the end. Ethan smiled faintly. Like it did yesterday. Daniel chuckled softly. Exactly like that. The morning after Clara's confession, the sun rose softly over the small town, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Daniel stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. His eyes stared at the horizon, but his mind was somewhere else, lost in a mix of pain, memories, and quiet realization. The house was silent, except for the faint sound of birds outside. Ethan was still asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, his small face calm after so many days of fear and tension. Daniel smiled faintly at the sight. For the first time in a long while, his son looked peaceful. He turned back to the window and thought about everything that had happened. The wedding, the truth, Clara's lies, and her final words before she walked away. It all felt like a heavy movie he had been forced to live through. He had loved Clara, truly believed that she was his second chance at happiness, but now he realized that love built on secrets was never real love at all. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, maybe this happened for a reason. He walked over to his desk, where Clara's letter still lay folded beside a family photo, one of him, his late wife Sarah, and a much younger Ethan smiling at the beach. Daniel picked up the picture and ran his fingers over it. You were right, Sarah, he said softly. You always told me to listen to my heart, not just my eyes. A small tear rolled down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. It was a tear of acceptance, not sadness. He sat down and began to write a letter, not to Clara, not to the police, but to himself. He wrote about forgiveness, about mistakes, about how love should never be a game of fear or control. Sometimes, he wrote, people enter our lives to teach us lessons, not to stay forever. Clara's mistake reminded me that truth is stronger than love built on lies. And my son reminded me that real love never hides. When he finished writing, he folded the letter and placed it inside the same frame as the photo of his wife. It was his way of closing the chapter. Later that morning, Ethan woke up and rubbed his eyes. Morning, Dad, he said sleepily. Daniel smiled. Morning, champ. Hungry? Ethan nodded, and Daniel began making breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast filled the kitchen, blending with the sunlight pouring through the window. For the first time in days, the house felt warm again. As they ate, Ethan looked thoughtful. Dad, are you okay? He asked quietly. Daniel nodded slowly. I am, son. I'm better now. You know, life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes it breaks us before it makes us stronger. Ethan tilted his head. So you're not sad anymore? Daniel smiled gently. A little sad, yes. But I'm also grateful, because I still have you. Ethan's face brightened and he grinned. You'll always have me, Dad. They both laughed softly, and for a moment the heavy memories of the past few days began to fade. Later, Daniel decided to take Ethan for a drive. They went to the park where they used to go when Ethan's mother was alive. The trees were tall and green, the air fresh with the smell of earth after the rain. Ethan ran toward the swings and Daniel followed slowly, watching him with pride. This is what matters, he thought. Not money, not success, not second chances that come with lies, just this. He sat on a bench and watched Ethan swing back and forth, laughing freely. It was the sound of healing. After a while, Ethan ran back and sat beside him. Dad, he said, do you think Clara really loved you? Daniel took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. Maybe she did, in her own broken way, he said softly. But love without honesty isn't love, Ethan. It's just an illusion. Ethan nodded, understanding more than his young age suggested. Mom loved you honestly, didn't she? He asked. Daniel smiled warmly. Yes, your mother was pure in everything she did. She loved with her whole heart, even when she was sick. And I think she's watching us right now, proud of how brave you've been. Ethan smiled shyly and leaned against his father's arm. I miss her, he whispered. I miss her too, Daniel replied. They sat there quietly for a while, watching the birds fly across the blue sky. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. It was a message from the police. Alex has confessed, it read. He admitted everything, including using Clara. She will be released soon for helping with the investigation. Daniel stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to feel. He showed it to Ethan, who frowned. Does that mean she's free? He asked. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, but maybe she deserves a second chance to live the right way. Ethan looked thoughtful. Do you think she'll come back? No, Daniel said softly. And that's okay. Some stories are meant to end. He put his phone away and stood up. Come on, let's go get ice cream. Ethan grinned and jumped up. As they walked away, the wind blew gently through the trees, carrying away the last whispers of their pain. Back at home later that evening, Daniel sat by his window again, watching the sunset. The sky looked peaceful, and for the first time his heart did too. He realized that life had given him something more precious than what he lost, a reminder that true love doesn't just come from romance, but from family, honesty, and courage. He looked at Ethan, who was drawing something at the table, and smiled. You know, son, he said, you're my hero. Ethan turned and laughed. Me, I'm just a kid. Daniel shook his head. No, you're the boy who saved his father from losing everything. Ethan's eyes sparkled and he smiled proudly. That night, before going to bed, Daniel looked at the sky and whispered a quiet thank you to his late wife for watching over them, to his son for his bravery, and even to Clara for teaching him what love should never be. As he turned off the lights, he knew he was no longer the same man who had stood at that altar, waiting for a perfect wedding. He was stronger, wiser, and finally at peace. The pain had become a lesson, and the lesson had become a new beginning. A few weeks later, the city had moved on from the stormy events that had shaken Daniel's life. But for him and Ethan, everything still felt new, fragile and quietly beautiful. The house was brighter now, filled with laughter instead of fear. The mornings began with the smell of coffee and the sound of Ethan's cartoons echoing through the living room. The nights ended with stories and hugs instead of tears. Daniel had gone back to work, and although people whispered about what happened at his almost wedding, he no longer cared. He had stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped regretting. Life had taught him that peace was not found in what others thought of you, but in what you chose to forgive. One Saturday morning, Ethan ran into his father's room holding a small envelope. Dad, the mailman left this for you, he said, his voice curious. Daniel opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter. His heart paused for a second when he saw the name at the bottom. Clara. He took a deep breath and began to read. Dear Daniel, the letter began, I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to thank you for the kindness you showed me, even after everything I did. The police have allowed me to leave the city. I'm moving to another town to start over. I've joined a program that helps women rebuild their lives after mistakes. I want to be someone my younger self could have been proud of. You and Ethan saved me in a way you'll never understand. I hope you both find happiness. Maybe someday, if fate is kind, our paths will cross again. Until then, please know that I'm truly sorry. Clara. Daniel folded the letter and sat quietly for a while. He didn't feel anger anymore, only a calm sadness mixed with a strange sense of relief. She's finally doing the right thing, he murmured. Ethan looked up at him. Are you mad at her, Dad? He asked softly. Daniel smiled faintly. No, son, I'm not. Sometimes people lose themselves, but if they find the courage to start over, that's worth something. Ethan nodded as if he understood. Later that day, Daniel decided to take Ethan out to the countryside. They drove with the windows down, letting the cool wind play with their hair. The road was lined with golden fields and blooming trees. It was peaceful, just father and son. No more secrets, no more lies. They stopped near a small hill where the sky looked endless. Ethan ran ahead, laughing, while Daniel followed slowly, his eyes soft with love. When they reached the top, they sat together watching the sunset. The orange glow touched their faces, and the silence between them felt full of meaning. Dad, Ethan said suddenly, do you ever think Mom would be happy with us now? Daniel turned to him and smiled. Yes, I do. She'd be proud of how brave you've been. You saved me, Ethan. You made me see what really matters. Ethan grinned shyly. I just didn't want to lose you, Dad. Daniel placed his arm around his son's shoulders. And you never will, he said gently. No matter what happens, we'll always have each other. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in deep gold. A quiet breeze carried the scent of flowers and earth. Daniel looked at the horizon and felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace. For the first time since his wife's death, he believed that life could be beautiful again. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, all of it had led him here to this moment of quiet truth. He realized that every wound he had carried had turned into wisdom. Every tear had watered the roots of his strength, and every goodbye had taught him the meaning of love. Ethan leaned his head on Daniel's shoulder, and they watched as the last bit of sunlight disappeared behind the hills. The world felt still, like time itself had paused to give them this moment. "Dad," Ethan whispered, "can we visit Mom's place tomorrow? I want to tell her everything.